I built this house with my own hands. Not in the poetic sense people throw around when they talk about building a life, but literally hammer by hammer, nail by nail, plank by plank. I was 34 then, fresh out of debt, fresh out of luck, and determined to give my wife and our little girl a roof that would never depend on anyone's goodwill. Back then, the land was nothing but mud and cedar. The neighbors thought I was out of my mind. You could buy a ready-made place for half the sweat, they said. But I wanted something that had my fingerprints in its bones. So I worked weekends, nights, holidays. Every beam in this house remembers the sound of my heartbeat. Every window holds the reflection of the man I used to be: hopeful, stubborn, proud. When my wife, Linda, passed from breast cancer 15 years ago, the house went silent in a way that even the wind respected. I tried selling it once, but I couldn't go through with it. Too many ghosts here, maybe. Or too many promises. Either way, it became more than a home. It became proof that love could outlast the body. Our daughter, Emily, grew up running barefoot through these halls, painting murals on walls I pretended not to notice. I fixed her first bicycle under the oak in the back, taught her how to drive on the gravel road out front, walked her down the same path on her wedding day. The photographs still hang by the stairwell, a line of frozen smiles leading upward, each one a reminder of how far we'd come. Then came Mark. He wasn't a bad man, not at first glance. Confident handshake, polished shoes, polite enough to fool anyone who mistakes manners for character. He sold insurance, always had a story about clients and numbers and growth projections. I didn't understand half of it, but he looked at my daughter the way young men do when they think they've found something bright enough to light the rest of their lives. I gave them the guest room when they said they wanted to save up for a down payment. I figured a few months, maybe a year. That was 3 years ago. At first, I didn't mind. The house felt alive again, coffee brewing early, laughter echoing down the hall. Emily would cook on weekends. Mark would mow the lawn and talk about stocks. I thought maybe it was a good trade, my space for their company. I was wrong. Little things started changing. The first was the mailbox. One morning, I noticed Mark had replaced the old rusted box I'd kept for decades. A new one stood there, sleek, black, engraved with Dalton residence. Dalton. His last name, not mine. When I asked about it, he smiled. Just thought it looked more modern, Dad. Branding, you know. Branding. As if my life was a product line. Next came the living room furniture, my wife's favorite sofa replaced with something minimalist. Then the curtains, the pictures, the family Bible from the mantel to a closet. Every change came with a compliment, every removal wrapped in a sentence that started with, "You deserve better." I kept quiet. At 63, you learn the cost of peace. It's not cheap, but it's easier than starting a war under your own roof. Still, I began to feel like a guest in the place I built. The smell of their imported candles replaced the scent of pine floors I used to polish myself. The TV blared news about interest rates and property values, things that never used to matter here. Emily spent more time scrolling through her phone than sitting with me on the porch. Then one afternoon, while I was fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabin, casual, confident. Once my parents move in, we'll finally have everyone together. Dad loves the backyard. We'll build them a little sunroom where that shed is. My hands froze. The screwdriver slipped from my grip and clattered to the floor. Emily's response was soft, uncertain. I don't know if Dad's ready for that. He'll come around, Mark said. He's old school, but he'll understand it's best for everyone. Property this size shouldn't sit under one person's name forever. One person's name. Mine. I didn't say anything that evening. I watched them eat dinner, smiling, laughing about some Netflix show. I studied Mark's face, the easy arrogance, the subtle ownership in the way he reached for the salt shaker, the way he looked around the dining room like it was a meeting he was already winning. I lay awake that night listening to the walls. The house has a way of talking when you're quiet enough to hear it, the creak of the floorboards, the sigh of the wind against the shutters. It felt uneasy, like even the wood sensed something wasn't right. The next day, I found a folded sheet of paper on the kitchen counter. A floor plan. Additions. Guest suite extension, scribbled in blue ink right where my workshop stood. Mark's handwriting. I waited until Emily came home from work and asked, as gently as I could, "Sweetheart, are you planning to bring Mark's parents here?" She hesitated, eyes darting like a child caught in a lie. "It's just an idea. They're getting older, and Mark thought it would be easier if we all stayed together. We have the space." I repeated. "Since when did my house become our space?" "Dad, please don't make this a thing. You always said family should look after family." I wanted to tell her this wasn't family, it was colonization with a smile. But the words died in my throat when I saw how tired she looked. She loved him. Maybe that love blinded her the same way mine had blinded me once. That night I walked through every room, touching the walls, remembering. The groove on the staircase where Emily's tricycle left a scar. The dent in the doorframe where Linda once slammed it during a fight and laughed about it later. The oak table I built the summer we couldn't afford store-bought furniture. I realized something painful. Mark wasn't just trying to take my house. He was erasing the memory of everyone who came before him. 2 mornings later, I came down for coffee and found Mark in my seat at the head of the table. He was reading the paper like he belonged there, one leg crossed, slippers on my rug. He didn't even look up. "Morning," he said. "We were thinking about turning your den into a home office. I'll handle the renovation costs." I stared at him for a long moment. "You'll handle them?" "Yeah," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "It's an investment, really, in the family property." I smiled, then small, tight, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. Interesting way to look at it. That day, for the first time in my life, I left my coffee unfinished. I drove to the edge of town, to the same hardware store where I'd bought nails 30 years ago. The same man still owned it, older, slower, but with the same spark. We talked a bit about the past. When I got back in the truck, I sat there for an hour, engine off, watching the horizon burn orange with sunset. By the time the stars appeared, I knew what I had to do. They wanted my house. They forgot whose name was on the deed. And I, quiet, grieving, patient me, had finally run out of patience. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay there in the dark, staring at the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. It painted long, thin shadows across the ceiling like bars. I could hear the clock in the hallway ticking in uneven rhythm, like a nervous heartbeat. Every sound in that house felt louder now, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the water heater, the weight of footsteps above me. Their footsteps. I used to love that sound, Emily walking overhead, laughter echoing down the hall, life filling the quiet spaces Linda left behind. But now, it sounded like occupation. Like strangers living on land I once called sacred. When I finally drifted into half-sleep, I dreamed of the house again, only it wasn't wood and brick anymore. It was clay, soft, and every time I tried to hold it together, someone else's hands came in, reshaping it, taking from it. I woke up with sweat down my spine, breath tight in my chest. The coffee pot hissed to life in the kitchen before I even got up. Mark was an early riser. He liked to fill the mornings with motion, as if his energy could justify his presence. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, listening to the faint clatter of dishes. I could almost hear Linda's voice, soft, calm. "Don't let them take your peace, honey." But peace, I've learned, is something thieves go for first. I walked down the hallway slowly, barefoot on cold wood. The house smelled different, sharp and citrusy, like store-bought perfection. My wife used to simmer cinnamon sticks and orange peels in water every Sunday morning. That smell used to mean home. Now it meant guest. When I reached the kitchen, Mark was sitting there with his laptop open, typing away. He looked up, flashed me that salesman grin. Morning, Dad. Coffee's hot. I made enough for everyone. Everyone. The word hit me like a pebble tossed into a still pond, small but spreading ripples of irritation through the quiet. I poured myself a cup, sat opposite him. You always this early? Trying to get ahead, he said, stretching. When the new place is set up, I'll probably move my office here full-time. Clients love the homey vibe. The new place? I asked. He blinked, caught off guard. I mean this place. Once we renovate, it'll basically be new. I nodded slowly. Right. Once we renovate. He smiled, oblivious. Exactly. The air between us felt heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. I didn't trust myself to speak. I just looked around the kitchen at the marble counters Linda picked, the old wooden stool with my initials carved underneath, the crooked cabinet door she always meant to fix. Every inch of this place held pieces of her, of me, of us. And here sat this man, already rehearsing how it would sound when he called it his. After breakfast, I took a walk around the property. The air was crisp, dry, that late autumn kind of air that smells like cold earth and dying leaves. The grass in the backyard had started to yellow, and the oak tree stood bare, its limbs skeletal against the morning sky. That tree was where I buried my dog, Max, 20 years ago. Where Emily had her first birthday picnic. Where Linda and I sat one evening, holding hands, after her first chemo session, just watching the sunset without saying a word. I could almost see them there again, her, in that faded denim jacket she loved, and Emily as a little girl, hair in messy braids, laughing with ice cream on her chin. For a second, the air even smelled like summer again, cut grass, barbecue smoke, the faint perfume of magnolias from the neighbor's yard. Then it was gone. I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. The house wasn't just walls and memories, it was the last living piece of Linda. Selling it would feel like erasing her. But letting them take it would be worse. That afternoon, Emily called me from the porch. Dad, Mark and I wanted to talk to you about something. I wiped my hands on my jeans and followed her inside. They were both sitting at the table, looking like a pair of bankers ready to pitch a loan. Mark gestured to a folder. We've been talking about updating the deed. You know, just for future security. Having both our names on it could make things easier down the line. Estate stuff, taxes, that sort of thing. My throat went dry. Easier for who? He laughed. For everyone. You're still the owner, of course, but it's good to think ahead. Protecting family assets, you know. Family assets. I wanted to laugh, the kind of laugh that comes when you realize the joke's been on you all along. Emily reached out, resting her hand on my arm. Dad, we're not trying to take anything from you. We just want to help manage things. You shouldn't have to worry about paperwork at your age. At my age. That phrase landed harder than I expected. Not because it was untrue, but because of the way it stripped something from me: dignity, autonomy, the right to still matter. I pushed the folder back toward them. I'll handle my own paperwork. Mark's jaw tightened, but he forced a smile. Of course, just trying to help. The conversation ended there, but the silence that followed was louder than any argument. That night, I sat in my den, my space, the one room untouched by their redecorating. The air smelled like old wood and pipe tobacco, and the lamp's warm glow softened the edges of my thoughts. I opened the drawer where I kept Linda's letters. She'd written them before she died, one for each year after she was gone, sealed in envelopes marked "Read this when you need to remember who you are." I picked one at random. The handwriting was shaky but still hers. If you're reading this, you're probably trying to keep the peace again. You've always been too gentle for this world. Promise me you won't let anyone treat your kindness like weakness. Love protects, but it also defends. Don't let our home become a museum someone else curates. My throat tightened. I folded the letter back, staring at it until my eyes blurred. The next morning, Emily avoided me. She and Mark had breakfast in silence, exchanging glances that carried all the words they didn't dare speak. I could feel the walls closing in, not from age or space, but from distance. Emotional distance. Days turned into a slow routine of politeness and avoidance. Mark started taking phone calls in the den when I wasn't around. Contractors came by to give estimates. Every time I tried to ask a question, Emily would deflect. "Mark's handling it, Dad. Don't worry." But worry is what you do when everything you built starts slipping through your fingers. I stopped going to the dining table. Ate alone in the kitchen, like a tenant in my own house. The air between us grew colder, heavier. Even the dog, my old mutt Charlie, started spending more time on the porch, as if he too sensed something sour beneath the floorboards. One evening, I heard laughter from the living room. Mark on the phone, saying something about our property again, this time to his parents. My blood ran cold. I pictured them here, his mother rearranging Linda's kitchen, his father sitting in my chair, calling it home. That night I stood outside under the oak tree until the moon rose. My breath came out in slow white clouds. I whispered to Linda, like I sometimes do when it's too heavy to carry alone. "They're taking the house, Lynn." And maybe it was the wind, maybe it was memory, but I swear I heard her answer in the rustle of the dry leaves. "Then stop them." The next day, I started looking through the filing cabinet in my office. The old deed, the insurance papers, the appraisal, everything still in my name. I ran my hand over the embossed title. My name, clear as day. Mine. Something in me clicked then, not anger, not even revenge. Just clarity. The quiet kind that comes when you realize there's no one left to protect but yourself. I looked around that office, the framed photo of Linda holding Emily at age 3, the faint smell of varnish from the desk I built, the creak of the leather chair when I leaned back, and I decided that if they wanted to play ownership games, I'd show them what real ownership meant. But before that, I needed to let the hurt breathe. So I drove. Out past the city limits, through winding roads lined with naked trees and silent fields. The radio hummed old country songs I hadn't heard in years. Every mile peeled something off me: resentment, grief, fear, until all that was left was resolve. By the time I pulled into the overlook that faced the valley, the sun was gone and the world was a sheet of silver light. I sat there, listening to the ticking of the cooling engine, and whispered one last thing to the night air. I built this house for love, but I'll fight for it out of respect. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. The beginning of the end for him. And the beginning of my freedom. I used to think people changed slowly, like the seasons. I thought you could sense the shift, the gradual chill before winter, the softness before spring. But betrayal isn't a season. It's a switch. One moment you're sipping coffee in your kitchen, and the next you're staring across the table at someone who's already decided your life belongs to them. The morning after that drive, I woke up with a strange kind of calm. Not peace, but precision. The kind a carpenter feels before the first cut: steady hands, clear sight, and no room for hesitation. I made breakfast the old way: cast iron skillet, bacon grease, the smell of black coffee thick enough to wake the dead. Mark walked in halfway through, still in his robe, scrolling on his phone. He glanced at the stove, smiled like we were old friends. "Smells good. You always do make it feel like a bed and breakfast here." I looked at him, really looked. The robe, the messy hair, the entitlement. He didn't even realize the insult hidden in his compliment. Bed and breakfast. Temporary comfort. Service with a smile. I smiled back. Enjoy it while it lasts. He didn't catch it. He never did. That day, I went into town. First stop was the lawyer's office. Old friend named Harris, same man who handled my wife's will. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see me. "Haven't seen you since the funeral, old man. What brings you?" I told him everything. The son-in-law, the deed, the plans to move his parents in. His expression shifted from pity to anger. "They think they can just take it?" "Not if I move first," I said. We spent 2 hours reviewing the paperwork. My name alone on the deed. No co-signers, no trusts, no fancy loopholes. Just me. Harris explained options: transfer, sale, escrow, even donation if I wanted. I listened, weighing each word like nails in a board. When I left his office, the wind had picked up. The flag outside the courthouse snapped hard in the cold. I buttoned my coat and walked down Main Street, passing the bakery, the old barber shop, the antique store that never sold anything but memories. I stopped at the real estate office. The glass door jingled as I stepped inside, and a woman with a practiced smile looked up from her desk. Afternoon. Looking to buy or sell? Sell, I said. Quietly. She tilted her head. How soon? Soon enough to surprise a few people. She chuckled politely, but something in my tone must have told her I meant it. We arranged an appraisal for the following week. Cash buyers only. No signs on the lawn. Discretion was key. When I got home, the house was empty. Emily had gone to work. Mark was somewhere in town pretending to be busy. I stood in the doorway for a long time, listening to the stillness. The light coming through the windows painted golden rectangles across the floorboards. It looked like the house was glowing from the inside. I walked from room to room, whispering to Linda again. I'm not doing this out of anger, Lynn. I'm doing this because they forgot whose dream this was. That night, Emily asked if I was feeling all right. You've been quiet lately. I'm fine, I said. Just thinking. About what? I smiled. About making space. She thought I meant for Mark's parents. She looked relieved. I let her believe it. For the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I listened to their renovation ideas, nodded at their budget plans, even complimented the new rug Mark ordered without asking. I was polite, agreeable, invisible, the perfect old man fading into the background. But underneath, every word they spoke built another brick in my wall of resolve. One evening, I overheard Mark on the phone again, pacing near the porch. His tone was sharp, impatient. Yeah, Mom, it's basically ours. We're finalizing the deed soon. He's too sentimental to notice what's happening. Too sentimental. That was the night something in me hardened completely. I realized pity and patience are twin thieves. They steal your time and call it virtue. I'd been patient long enough. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The sky was bruised purple, the kind of quiet that makes even the birds hesitate. I packed a small suitcase, just clothes, documents, and the box of letters from Linda. Then I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and paper. I started writing not a note of goodbye, but a record. Every conversation, every plan Mark had tried to make, every attempt to push me out. I wasn't sure why I was doing it at first, but it felt right. Like laying down evidence for an unseen jury. Around 8, Emily came downstairs. You're up early. Old habits, I said, folding the paper. She poured coffee, rubbing her eyes. Mark's meeting with the contractor today. He wants to expand the patio before winter. Tell him to be careful with the foundation, I said softly. Wouldn't want the ground shifting under his feet. She laughed, unaware of the double meaning. Later that day, I called Harris again. Let's move ahead, I told him. Full sail. Keep it clean. Sure you're ready for that? He asked. I'm past ready. He paused. You want me to inform your daughter? No, I said. Let the papers speak first. That week, while Mark planned his future home, I finalized the sale. A retired couple from out-of-state, quiet people, respectful, paid in full. They didn't need to move in right away, which suited me perfectly. We scheduled the transfer for the following Monday. Saturday morning, Mark came bounding into the kitchen holding a stack of glossy brochures. Look at these patio designs, Dad. I think we can add a pergola out back. Maybe even a fire pit. What do you think? I looked up from my newspaper. I think you should make sure the owners agree before spending their money. He grinned. You mean us? I smiled faintly. Sure. Let's go with that. He laughed, not catching the tone. You're funny. You should relax more. Maybe take a little trip when construction starts. We'll handle things. A trip. The irony almost made me laugh. That afternoon, I walked down to the shed, the one he'd wanted to tear down for his parents' sunroom. Inside, the air smelled of oil and sawdust. My old tools lined the walls, each one with a memory attached. I ran my hand over the workbench, the initials I'd carved there decades ago. L+M equals home. I whispered. They'll never understand what that means. Sunday night, I cooked dinner for everyone: steak, potatoes, corn from the garden. It felt almost ceremonial. Emily smiled, touched my hand. It's been a while since you cooked like this. Thought we should have one last meal together, I said. Mark raised his glass. To family, he said. I raised mine. To truth. He didn't notice the difference. After dinner, I excused myself, went upstairs, and looked around my room one last time. The moonlight came in through the window, cold and silver. I could see the faint outline of the oak tree outside the one that had seen everything. I sat on the edge of the bed and whispered, "Tomorrow it's done." I didn't feel guilt. Just relief. Monday morning, before sunrise, I packed my truck and drove out quietly. The house looked peaceful in the rearview mirror, soft light on the porch, a wisp of chimney smoke, the silhouette of the oak tree reaching toward the pale sky. I parked a few miles down the road near the diner, waiting. Around 9, Harris called. It's official. Transfer complete. I closed my eyes. Thank you. At noon, I got another call. Emily's number. I didn't answer. I imagined her standing in the kitchen, the sound of Mark shouting in disbelief as the new owners arrived with their paperwork. I could almost hear the chaos voices rising, confusion turning to rage. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was quiet. Deep, cleansing quiet. That evening, I checked into a small inn by the lake, the kind with floral curtains and old radios that still worked if you jiggled the dial. I sat on the porch, watched the sun drop behind the water, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own life. In the distance, a loon called a long, echoing cry that sounded halfway between mourning and freedom. Maybe that's what justice sounds like. The hardest part about revenge isn't anger. It's patience. When you decide to take back what's yours, you learn quickly that justice can't be rushed. It has to be built, brick by careful brick, until the whole structure stands steady enough to never crumble again. That was my mindset as I sat in that small lakeside inn, planning my next move. The sale was done. The house was no longer mine. But it also wasn't Mark's, not now, not ever. The title had passed quietly into the hands of people who respected what a home meant. They'd agreed to let me finalize a few estate matters before taking possession. That gave me time to watch how Mark handled losing something he thought was already his. And I'll tell you this: how a man handles loss reveals more truth than how he handles love. I called Harris from the inn's payphone 2 days later. "I'll need you to mail copies of the transfer papers," I said. "And make sure delivery requires a signature." He chuckled. "You really want to twist the knife, don't you?" "Not twist," I said. "Just remind." When I hung up, I drove back into town, parked near the diner, and watched the morning commuters pass. The smell of bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the open window. Across the street, the hardware store owner waved. He'd seen me so often there that I might as well have been part of the furniture. I waved back but didn't stop. I had another visit to make. Emily's workplace sat at the edge of town, a modest building with the company name in peeling blue letters. I waited in the truck until she came out for lunch. She looked tired, drawn. I rolled the window down halfway. She froze when she saw me. Dad, where have you been? Out, I said. Mark's been going crazy trying to reach you. He says you sold the house. Please tell me that's not true. I met her eyes. It's true. Her lips trembled. Why would you do that without talking to us? I leaned forward slightly. Because, sweetheart, somewhere along the line, us stopped including me. She looked away, tears forming. Mark didn't mean he thought he was just trying to help. I nodded slowly. If control feels like help to him, then maybe he needs to learn what losing control feels like. Dad, you blindsided him. I smiled faintly. Then we're even. She didn't say another word. Just stood there, watching as I drove off. It hurt God. It hurt to see my little girl looking at me like I was the villain. But I knew better. Sometimes love means letting people sit in the mess they've allowed. You can't save them from the lesson they refuse to learn. Later that afternoon, Harris called again. Paperwork's delivered. Signed by your son-in-law himself. Guess that's poetic justice. Describe his face, I said quietly. Red, Harris said, laughing. Like a man watching his own house burn down. I didn't laugh. I just exhaled. That'll do. For the next week, I stayed away. No calls, no visits. Just quiet mornings by the lake, long walks through the forest, dinners alone under the soft hum of old light bulbs. I'd always thought solitude was loneliness. Turns out, it's only lonely when you're surrounded by people who don't see you anymore. Then one morning, there was a knock on my door at the inn. I opened it to find Emily. Eyes swollen, voice trembling. Dad, please come home. Mark's gone off the rails. He's saying you tricked him, that you scammed us out of our future. I gestured for her to come in. She sat at the small round table, twisting her hands. Did he read the paperwork? I asked. Yes. But he says you deceived him. That you should have told us. I poured her some tea. When someone's stealing your house, you don't warn them before you lock the door. Her shoulders sagged. He's angry. At you. At me. He says you embarrassed him in front of everyone. He embarrassed himself, I said. I just gave him a stage. She looked up, tears glistening. You could have talked to me first. I tried, I said softly. Every time I mentioned the house, he spoke for you. She stared down into her cup. He said it would be better for everyone if I wasn't there. She didn't answer. The silence that followed was thick enough to feel. Finally, she whispered, Where will you go? Somewhere quiet. Somewhere mine again. She nodded slowly, understanding dawning behind her pain. Before she left, she handed me something, a folded photograph. It was from years ago. Me, Linda, and Emily on the porch. Linda's arm around my shoulder, Emily sitting on my knee. Behind us, the house glowing in late summer light. She'd be proud of you, Emily said softly. I didn't answer, just held the photo like a relic. When she left, I sat there for hours, watching the shadows move across the floor. By the end of the week, the new owners had moved a few boxes in. They sent me a message thanking me for keeping the place in such good shape. I smiled at that. They didn't know how much life had passed through those rooms, how much love, how much betrayal. But at least they'd treat it like a home again, not a prize. Still, I had one last thing to do. Mark had humiliated me without raising his voice. His arrogance had been polite, his takeover disguised as care. I knew that kind of manipulation, well, it's the kind people can't recognize until the curtain drops. So I decided to drop it for him, one final time. I arranged a meeting at the diner, the same one near the old courthouse. When he walked in, I was already sitting at a corner booth, coffee in hand. He looked furious, jaw tight, eyes bloodshot. You think this is funny? He hissed, sliding into the seat across from me. You just sold our home. I set the cup down gently. Not our home. My home. Correction was my home. He slammed his fist on the table. A few heads turned. You humiliated me. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Yes, I said quietly, like a man who built his future on someone else's foundation. His nostrils flared. You're pathetic. You just couldn't handle letting go. You wanted to control everything. I leaned forward, voice calm. Control? You replaced my furniture, erased my wife's memory from the walls, tried to move your parents into a house you didn't pay a dime for. You didn't want family, Mark. You wanted territory. He laughed bitterly. You think you won? You'll die alone in some cheap apartment while we move on. I smiled faintly. Maybe. But I'll die free. You'll live owned by your ego. He stood abruptly, knocking the chair back. You're insane. I finished my coffee. No, Mark. I'm awake. He stormed out, muttering something under his breath. I watched him go, then turned to the waitress, who'd been eavesdropping the whole time. You handled that well, she said with a grin. Some men only understand peace after you remove their comfort, I said. After that, I didn't hear from him again, not directly. But word spreads fast in a small town. I heard about the shouting match he had at the bank, the argument with Emily that ended with him packing his things and leaving for his parents' house 2 states over. Good riddance. Emily stayed behind. She visited me a few weeks later at the Lakeside Inn. She'd left him, she said. Couldn't bear the bitterness anymore. I didn't gloat. I just held her. We watched the sunset together, both silent, both scarred but breathing again. When she left that evening, she said, You were right, Dad. About all of it. I smiled softly. No, sweetheart. I was just early. That night, I took a walk down to the water. The moonlight shimmered across the surface, soft and forgiving. Somewhere out there, the reflection of the house I'd built my house still existed in memory. But I realized something. I didn't need the structure anymore to remember who I was. The justice wasn't in the sale or the shock, it was in the restoration of peace. The proof that no one can take from you what you refuse to surrender. And as the wind shifted over the water, I heard it again, the echo of Linda's voice, gentle and certain. You did good. The hardest part about revenge isn't anger. It's patience. When you decide to take back what's yours, you learn quickly that justice can't be rushed, it has to be built, brick by careful brick, until the whole structure stands steady enough to never crumble again. That was my mindset as I sat in that small lakeside inn, planning my next move. The sale was done. The house was no longer mine. But it also wasn't Mark's, not now, not ever. The title had passed quietly into the hands of people who respected what a home meant. They'd agreed to let me finalize a few estate matters before taking possession. That gave me time to watch how Mark handled losing something he thought was already his. And I'll tell you this, how a man handles loss reveals more truth than how he handles love. I called Harris from the inn's payphone 2 days later. I'll need you to mail copies of the transfer papers, I said. And make sure delivery requires a signature. He chuckled. You really want to twist the knife, don't you? Not twist, I said. Just remind. When I hung up, I drove back into town, parked near the diner, and watched the morning commuters pass. The smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the open window. Across the street, the hardware store owner waved. He'd seen me so often there that I might as well have been part of the furniture. I waved back but didn't stop. I had another visit to make. Emily's workplace sat at the edge of town, a modest building with the company name in fading blue letters. I waited in the truck until she came out for lunch. She looked tired, drawn. When she spotted me, she stopped mid-step. Dad. Her voice cracked. Where have you been? Out, I said simply. Mark's been going crazy trying to reach you. He says you sold the house. Please tell me that's not true. I met her eyes. It's true. Her lips trembled. Why would you do that without talking to us? I leaned forward slightly. Because, sweetheart, somewhere along the line, us stopped including me. She looked away, tears forming. Mark didn't mean he thought he was just trying to help. I nodded slowly. If control feels like help to him, then maybe he needs to learn what losing control feels like. Dad, you blindsided him. I smiled faintly. Then we're even. She didn't say another word. Just stood there, watching as I drove off. That conversation replayed in my mind for days. It's strange how the people you love most can hurt you not with cruelty, but with silence. I'd done everything in my life for her. Every hour I worked, every board I nailed, every bill I paid, it was all to build something she could someday lean on. I never imagined I'd have to protect that same gift from her. That evening, the sky opened up with rain. The sound on the lake roof was rhythmic, hypnotic. I sat on the porch of the inn, the smell of wet pine rising around me, and let the storm wash through my thoughts. Linda used to say storms cleanse more than they destroy. Maybe that's what I was doing, washing away the rot that had crept into our family. The next morning, Harris called. Paperwork's delivered. Signed by your son-in-law himself. Guess that's poetic justice. Describe his face, I said quietly. Red, Harris said, laughing. Like a man watching his own house burn down. I didn't laugh. I just exhaled. That'll do. The news traveled faster than I expected. By afternoon, Emily called again. I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to absorb her confusion. Not yet. Let them sit with it for a while, let the walls they'd planned to paint and rename echo with emptiness. By the third day, the quiet became its own kind of power. Every time my phone buzzed, I pictured them standing in the kitchen I built, arguing over what had gone wrong, who was to blame. I could imagine Mark pacing, his voice rising, veins bulging. He wasn't angry because he lost the house. He was angry because he lost control. That distinction matters. Men like him feed off ownership. It's their currency, their identity. Take that away, and you don't just bruise their pride, you strip away their armor. Later that week, Emily appeared at the inn. I saw her car in the lot before she knocked. She looked pale, exhausted. Her eyes searched mine, but this time there wasn't anger, just confusion, maybe even shame. Dad, she said softly. He's furious. He says you tricked him, that you scammed us out of our future. I poured her tea and gestured for her to sit. The smell of chamomile filled the room. Did he read the paperwork? Yes. But he says you deceived him. That you should have told us. I smiled faintly. When someone's stealing your house, you don't warn them before you lock the door. She looked down. He says you embarrassed him in front of his family. He embarrassed himself, I said. I just gave him a stage. Her lips parted to protest, then closed again. The silence that followed felt heavy. Finally, she whispered, You could have talked to me first. I tried, I said softly. Every time I brought up the house, he answered for you. Tears welled in her eyes. I thought we were helping. I reached across the table and took her hand. There's a difference between helping and taking over. Love doesn't erase someone else's place, it respects it. She nodded weakly. Where will you go now? Somewhere quiet, I said. Somewhere that still feels like mine. She hesitated, then handed me a folded photograph, one of the old ones from the stairwell wall. Me, Linda, and Emily on the porch. The light behind us looked golden, almost holy. She'd be proud of you, she said softly. Her words landed somewhere deep. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until then. After she left, I walked down to the water's edge. The lake was perfectly still. The air smelled of rain and pine needles. I skipped a pebble across the surface, watching the ripples spread out until they disappeared. That's what I wanted to disappear, just enough that they'd finally see what my presence had been worth. The next day, I sent Harris a message. Tell the buyers they can move in early. I'll cover the last utilities. He replied, You sure? Completely. There's something satisfying about closing a chapter cleanly, no loose ends, no what-ifs. I'd spent too many years patching walls and patching hearts. This time, the break needed to stay broken. But before I could let go completely, I wanted to face Mark one last time, not for vengeance, but for truth. I called him. The phone rang longer than it should have before he picked up. What do you want? He snapped. A conversation, I said. Face to face. He scoffed. About what? How you conned your own daughter. About what happens when you confuse generosity for surrender. He hesitated. Fine. Where? The diner. Noon. When he walked in the next day, the whole place seemed to shift. Conversations dipped, forks paused midair. Mark had that kind of presence, loud, restless energy that filled the air like static. He sat across from me, arms folded. You think this is funny? He hissed. You just sold our home? Not our home, I said calmly. Mine. Correction was mine. He slammed his palm on the table, making the silverware jump. You humiliated me. Do you have any idea how this makes me look? Yes, I said evenly. Like a man who built his future on someone else's foundation. His jaw clenched. You're pathetic. You just couldn't let go. You had to prove you're still in control. I leaned forward slightly. Control? You replaced my furniture, erased my wife's memory from the walls, tried to move your parents into a house you didn't pay a dime for. That's not control, Mark. That's entitlement with better lighting. He sneered. You think you won? You'll die alone in some cheap apartment while we move on. I took a slow sip of coffee. Maybe. But I'll die free. You'll live owned by your ego. He stared at me, breathing hard. You're insane. No, I said quietly. I'm awake. He shoved his chair back, muttering curses as he stormed out. The bell above the diner door jingled a strangely cheerful sound for such an ugly exit. The waitress came over, eyes wide. Everything okay here? I smiled. Better than it's been in years. When I stepped outside, the sky was overcast, a pale gray stretched wide over town. For the first time in months, I felt light. Not happy, just unburdened. Word got around fast. In small towns, stories travel quicker than mail. People whispered, some laughed, others called me heartless. But a few older folks who understood legacy patted my shoulder and said, You did right. That meant more than they knew. A week later, I heard from Emily again. She'd left Mark. Said she couldn't stand the resentment in his eyes, the way he blamed me for everything he'd lost. I didn't gloat. I just listened. Where will you go? I asked. I don't know yet, she said. But I want peace. Then you're already halfway there. That night, after she left, I walked down to the dock. The lake reflected the stars, the water calm as glass. I could see my own reflection looking back, older, yes, but not broken. I realized something then. Revenge had never been about punishment. It was about restoration. About reminding myself that dignity isn't negotiable. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Linda's last letter. I'd kept it sealed all this time. Under the moonlight, I finally opened it. If they ever try to take what you built, don't fight them with anger. Fight them with silence. The loudest power in this world is quiet integrity. The world doesn't reward it fast, but it rewards it forever. I folded the letter, pressing it to my heart. You were right, Lynn, I whispered. You always were. The wind rose gently over the lake, carrying her voice or maybe my memory of it through the trees. I stood there for a long time, watching the water ripple and settle again, thinking about how sometimes justice doesn't come in flames or fury. Sometimes it arrives like that lake, still, deep, and certain. And in that quiet certainty, I finally felt home again. After Mark stormed out of the diner, the whole town seemed to exhale. Even the old neon sign flickered back to life above the door, humming softly as if the place itself approved of what had just happened. I sat there for a long while, letting the silence settle in. The waitress refilled my cup, then quietly set a slice of pie in front of me. "On the house," she said, for the look on that man's face when he left. I smiled, the kind of slow, weary smile that comes when you've carried something heavy too long and finally set it down. Outside, the clouds began to thin. Sunlight filtered through in broken stripes across Main Street, touching the tops of cars and glinting off the courthouse windows. I took it as a sign, a small one, but a sign nonetheless that the storm was passing. That afternoon, I drove without a map. I followed the road past the city limits, through fields that shimmered with winter wheat, past barns faded gray by decades of weather. The farther I went, the lighter I felt, as if the wheels were rolling over not asphalt but all the weight I'd been carrying. By dusk, I stopped at a ridge overlooking the valley. The air smelled like frost and pine. I could see the distant roofs of the town I'd left behind, the one where I'd been a husband, a father, and almost a fool. I whispered into the cold, "You tried, Lynn. You told me to guard what we built." Guess I finally listened. The wind stirred in response, brushing through the trees with a sound like applause. The next few days blurred together, peaceful, uneventful. I'd wake before dawn, make coffee in the small kitchenette, sit by the window as mist lifted off the lake. Some mornings I'd write letters I never planned to send, one to Linda, one to Emily, even one to Mark. Words can heal the soul when spoken aloud, but they can also trap you if you never let them out. So I wrote them down and then burned them in the fireplace. Smoke and ash, my final transaction with the past. One afternoon, while walking along the lakeshore, I found an old driftwood branch half buried in sand. Smooth, weathered, curved just right for a walking stick. I carved a small line around it with my pocket knife, a mark to remind me that even broken wood can still hold you steady. I kept it. That night, Emily called. Her voice was softer, steadier. "Dad." Mark left. Packed a bag, went to his parents. He said there's nothing left here for him. I stared at the quiet dark outside my window. "Maybe now there's space for you." She hesitated. "I've been thinking about getting my own place. Smaller, closer to work. I don't need much." "You'll be fine," I said. "You come from strong stock." There was a pause. "He told me I'd regret choosing you over him." I chuckled lightly. "He's wrong about most things." "Thank you," she whispered. "For what?" "For reminding me who we were before he rewrote everything." I felt something break open in my chest, grief, pride, love, all tangled together. "You don't owe me thanks. You just owe yourself honesty." After she hung up, I sat by the lake again, watching the reflection of the moon ripple in the water. I realized I wasn't waiting for revenge anymore. I'd already won. The kind of victory that doesn't show up in headlines or bank statements, but in stillness. 2 days later, I decided to visit the house one final time before the new owners settled in fully. Harris arranged the keys for me. Driving down that old gravel road felt like walking through memory itself. The oak tree still stood tall at the gate, its branches bare and black against the pale sky. When I parked, the house looked smaller than I remembered, but somehow prouder, as if it too had survived something. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and cleaning polish. Empty walls. No laughter. No candles. Just silence, pure and unpolluted. I walked each room slowly, running my hand along the walls. I paused by the den, my den, where the faint outline of Linda's painting still marked the wall where the sunlight always hit just right. I whispered, "You can rest now." Then I left a note on the counter for the new owners. "Take care of this place. It was built by love, not by money. Listen to its quiet, it'll tell you how to live right." I locked the door behind me and slipped the key into the mailbox slot. One small click, and 30 years of history sealed itself shut behind me. On the way back to the inn, I stopped by the small hill where Linda was buried. The ground was cold, the grass stiff underfoot. I brushed the leaves from her headstone and laid the driftwood stick beside it. "I kept my promise," I said. "No one took what we built. Not even family." A gust of wind lifted a few leaves into the air, spinning them like tiny messengers. They caught the light and vanished into the trees. I stayed until the sun fell behind the ridge. When I turned to go, the first stars were out, small, scattered, indifferent. But I felt her there anyway, quiet as breath, present as gravity. That night, back at the inn, I poured myself a single glass of bourbon, the good kind, the one I'd been saving since the day she died. I raised it toward the window and said softly, "To freedom." The drink burned going down, but it was a clean burn. I thought about Mark then, not with hatred, but with a strange kind of pity. Men like him spend their lives chasing ownership, never realizing how empty the prize feels when it's finally theirs. He'd built his ego on my foundation, and when it crumbled, he had nowhere to stand. I imagined him sitting somewhere in his parents' living room, replaying every conversation, trying to find the moment he lost control. Maybe someday he'd see it wasn't about the house. It was about respect. About the unseen currency of gratitude he never learned to spend. And if he never saw that, well, the world has its own way of teaching slow learners. I leaned back in the armchair, listening to the hum of the old radiator. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and rain from distant chimneys. I thought of Emily, rebuilding her life somewhere bright and simple. I thought of Linda's laugh echoing in the kitchen. I thought of the man I used to be, tired, patient, too forgiving for his own good, and I realized he'd finally gone to rest. All that remained was me, older, yes, but sharpened by truth. The truth that love and boundaries are not enemies. That sometimes, kindness requires a locked door. That letting go isn't surrender, it's choosing peace over pride. I stood, turned off the light, and let the room fade into darkness. The moonlight spilled across the floor, pale and steady, like a road leading somewhere new. For the first time in decades, I felt no need to follow a plan, no urge to build or repair. I just wanted to exist quietly, like that moon shining enough to see by, belonging to no one. Tomorrow, I'd drive east. Maybe find a cabin by the mountains. Maybe buy a small fishing boat. Maybe nothing at all. Whatever came next, it would be mine, and that was enough. As I lay in bed, the wind picked up again, tapping softly against the windowpane. I closed my eyes and listened. It almost sounded like Linda humming in the kitchen, the old melody she used to sing when life still fit perfectly inside four walls and a porch. "Good night, Lynn," I whispered. The last thing I remember before sleep claimed me was the feeling of lightness in my chest, like someone had opened a window inside me, letting the air move freely again. And maybe that's the real secret of justice. It doesn't roar. It exhales. The news spread faster than wildfire in a dry field. By the end of that week, everyone in town had heard the story. The old man who sold his house out from under his son-in-law and vanished like smoke. I hadn't planned for that part, the gossip, the headlines, the local whispers. But sometimes, the truth walks on its own 2 feet, louder than you ever intended. I drove into town again on a Wednesday morning, parking across from the courthouse steps. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that smells like metal. People glanced at me as I passed, half with smirks, half with respect. I could almost read their thoughts. He finally did it. At the diner, the same waitress waved me in. "You've been the talk of Main Street," she said, pouring coffee before I even sat down. "That fella of yours came storming through here the other day, ranting about theft and family betrayal. Sheriff had to calm him down." I stirred the sugar slowly. "Did he calm down?" She laughed. "Not really. But everyone sure saw who the fool was. That was enough for me. I didn't need revenge paraded through town. Just the quiet satisfaction that truth had surfaced without me raising my voice." I sat there, sipping my coffee, and watched through the diner window as Mark's truck rolled by. He slowed when he saw me. His face was pale, drawn, the fury drained out of him and replaced with something heavier, shame. He didn't stop. Just looked for a long second, then kept driving. That look, that small, defeated glance, was the real execution of this story. No courtroom, no shouting match. Just the silent, public awareness that he'd lost something no title could restore: respect. Later that day, I met Harris at his office to finalize the last papers. "All wrapped up," he said, handing me the envelope. "You're officially free." I turned the deed over in my hands, the embossed seal catching the light. It wasn't just a document, it was closure. "Funny thing about houses," I said. "You think they hold your life together. But sometimes, you have to let them go to remember you were the one holding it all along." He nodded. "You sure you're done, old friend?" "I'm done," I said. "Let the walls keep their peace." I stepped outside into the golden dusk. The courthouse clock struck 5, echoing down Main Street. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the quiet rhythm of a town that finally felt like it belonged to me again, not because I owned it, but because I'd earned my place in it. On the way back to the inn, I stopped by Emily's work. She came out with that soft, tired smile that only daughters give their fathers after the storm has passed. "You okay?" I asked. "I think I will be," she said. "I found an apartment. Small, but mine. I started painting again." I smiled. "That's all I ever wanted for you, to have something that's yours." She nodded, eyes shining. "You know, people in town are calling you a legend." I chuckled. "Legends are just people who ran out of patience politely." She hugged me tight and whispered, "I understand now." And I think she did. Because when she pulled away, there was peace in her face. Not anger. Not confusion. Just acceptance. That night, I drove back to the lake one last time. The water was perfectly still, the moon sitting low and gold above the horizon. I took the last copy of the deed, folded it neatly, and set it on the surface of the water. For a moment, it floated, then slowly sank, disappearing beneath the ripples. "That chapter's yours now, Lynn," I said softly. "I've got the rest of the book to finish." The stars shimmered across the lake like scattered promises, and I knew some stories end not with noise, but with stillness. Justice, when done right, doesn't need applause. Just